here. Walk on stage.
So I just say hello. I'm Dr. Damon Miller. I'm here in Redwood City, California. And I'll let Carlisle and Christine introduce themselves, where they're at.
I'm Carlisle Koash, and currently in the East Coast in Florida. So welcome.
I'm Christine Roche. I am currently in Mountain View, Palo Alto, California, and I'm a board-certified functional and medical nutrition therapist and gut health expert.
Great. So we're all going to have a part in this course, and we're here to help just with this webinar. So I said this before, but I'll say it again real quickly. This webinar isn't the course. This is a webinar to introduce the course and to give people a chance to ask questions, get their questions answered. We're really, I'm really excited about this course. It's become apparent to me over the last 10 years, really, that autoimmune diseases are becoming increasingly more common, more prevalent. I like to think of it as an autoimmune epidemic, really. And part of that, when I say epidemic, there are a lot of things that aren't traditionally considered autoimmune diseases that are pretty much actually autoimmune diseases. So things like chronic Lyme disease, more recently, long COVID. There are a number of viruses that have a post-viral syndrome. Epstein-Barr virus, a lot of people have chronic Epstein-Barr and they have chronic problems. And any of these issues where there's something infectious, and then as that infection resolves, it never completely goes away, and you're left with some medical problems. That kind of a way that your immune system gets scrambled, and then you have these other problems. That's kind of the definition of an autoimmune disease, is a scrambled immune system. Technically, an autoimmune disease is that your immune system has started reacting and creating antibodies against your own tissues. But I like to say that there's common ground for allopathic medicine. I'm a traditional MD. I was educated at University of Cincinnati Medical School. I'm board certified in diagnostic radiology. And then went on in 1995, I stepped out of the hospital practice that I was in and started a private practice of integrative medicine, meaning I learned a lot of other things after medical school and I integrate those in with what I do to take care of people. And integrative medicine is now, there are many people who do the kinds of things I do, and we call ourselves integrative medical physicians. But allopathic medicine, the kind of traditional medicine that people learn in medical school, the kinds of things that dominate the internet, things like WebMD and all of that we call that allopathic medicine or traditional medicine. And both integrative medicine and allopathic medicine agree that an autoimmune disease is really an immune system that is so overstimulated. It's stimulated by so many things. It's overstimulated. The responses are boiling over, and now you're making antibodies against your own tissues. Now, where the difference comes is in the thinking of what do you do to help someone who's got an autoimmune disease. So traditional medicine or allopathic medicine says, well, if your immune system is overstimulated, let's kill it. Literally, that's what they do. They start with low-level poisons like steroids, and those, if those don't work or do enough of a job, then they move on to things. The original things beyond steroids were actually chemotherapy drugs. You know how chemotherapy causes an immune suppression? Well, they would use low doses of chemotherapy drugs, not to treat a cancer, but taking advantage of that immune suppressive part that those cancer chemotherapy drugs have. So methotrexate is commonly used. If you know someone who's got rheumatoid arthritis, that's a commonly used drug in that. And then there's a whole bunch of newer drugs. And I say newer drugs, they have a kind of, they're classified as Janus, Janus, Janus kinase inhibitors. And these drugs are heavily, heavily advertised on television. You see all these ads on television for psoriasis and irritable bowel syndrome and Crohn's disease and on and on and on. And those are all these newer classes of drugs that very selectively kill off part of your immune system. And so, what's the consequence of killing off somebody's immune system? Well, your immune system is supposed to protect you against infections and cancer. And so if you kill off the immune system, the side effects of those drugs are risks of serious, even life-threatening infections and developing cancers. But they do a really good job of suppressing symptoms. And so people are happy to use them. And the kind of disclosures or disclaimers that come at the end of these television ads, where somebody's talking at 180 miles an hour, and they're basically saying, this could cause serious problems, these drugs. And so if it were just for a short term, it might be worth taking the risk. But if you're going to go and use those drugs, you're not doing anything to treat the underlying problem. You're not treating the underlying disease. You're suppressing symptoms. That's all you're doing. You're suppressing symptoms. And if you stop taking the drugs, the symptoms come back. And so we're talking about taking these drugs for a lifetime. And they're pretty expensive, but they have these risks. And the risks are dose dependent, meaning the longer you take these drugs, the longer or the more chance you have of developing one of these nasty side effects. And so we're talking here in this course about what we've done in this office for years, almost decades now, where you kind of say, okay, the premise is that there's an overstimulated immune system. What can we do to quiet the immune system? And so we've developed what we call a 5-factor approach. And the 5 factors are the 5 things that we can work with. They're 5 things that we can work with to reduce their stimulation of the immune system. And we're going to talk about a little bit about all 5 of those in this course. So just stay with me here. And if we reduce a little bit the input from those 5 factors, we can kind of pull you back and have you at least have fewer symptoms, maybe even put you in remission. And so I think I'm going to just use now this, I made a little, with Carlisle's help, I made a little kind of a presentation. Let me see.
The moment of truth.
The moment of truth.
If the technology works. Oh, hey. All right, that's a good sign. Okay, so we're going to talk about, there's a concept I talk about. I've been talking about this for decades, which I call the threshold in autoimmune disease. So we'll get right away to what the threshold is, but it's just, that's the word that's kind of critical. So we're going to make a graph here. The up and down part, the y-axis of the graph is the amount of stimulation from your immune system. And then the x-axis, this horizontal axis here, is time. And so the 5 factors are going to fit in the center here. And this threshold up here is, you fill this container up to enough and you cross a threshold, then you have symptoms. So that's the whole idea, is that multiple stimulants from multiple factors, they all come together and they push you across the threshold, and now you've got symptoms. So what are the 5 factors? Well, foods are one. And they accumulate, the effect of these things accumulates over time. That's why this line is sloping upward here. So foods are one of the 5 factors. Toxins are the next of the 5 factors we talk about. And infections and dysbiosis. So infections can be chronic infections and current infections. And dysbiosis is what Christine's going to talk about in just a little bit. Dysbiosis is the word that's used to describe a disordered population of things living in your gut. Our gut is full of bugs, but a lot of them are there to do a good job. But if that whole colony of things living there, which is called the biome, B-I-O-M-E, if that whole colony of things that's living there gets out of whack and out of balance, then that's called dysbiosis, or disordered life. And then you get stress and emotional toxicity. Again, we'll talk more about that. And the 5th thing here is environmental. So, you eventually
stack all these things on top of each other, you cross the threshold, now you have symptoms. And you don't have to deal with all of these things perfectly. You know, you whittle away at foods, you whittle away at toxins, you whittle away at infections and dysbiosis, you whittle away at stress and emotional toxicity, you pare down and reduce your environmental stuff, and you get them all down a little bit. And now you're under the threshold. You still have some reactions to foods and toxins and all the other things, but as long as we can keep you under the threshold, you don't have symptoms. Now, this same approach is for very serious things like Crohn's disease or lung inflammation or multiple sclerosis or ALS, or lesser things like eczema and psoriasis, or even this whole approach works very well just if you have severe pollen or allergic environmental allergies. You know, you have hay fever that's terrible every spring. You know, we calm things down and you don't have hay fever anymore because the pollen, when the pollen comes along, let's go back here just one. You know, when the pollen comes along and now your eyes are watering and you're sneezing and you can't breathe well, that environmental stuff was sitting on top of a whole lot of other stimulation that was already there before the pollen ever started falling off the trees. And it's just the thing that pushed you over the edge. And this is a critical concept, one we stress over and over again in the course, is that it's never one thing. So you think if you have, just to use that minor example, you think you have hay fever and it's because of the pollen. No, it's because of the pollen on top of all the other things that are causing an overstimulation of your immune system. And so you've got to deal with all these things. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, it's just that you have to remember that there are multiple factors at work. You have to deal with all the factors to get the best effect. And if you do that, you get a great effect. So I'm going to turn this off right now. Just get back here to our thing. And so we'll just go through a little bit of the 5 factors. I'm going to start with foods. You know, a lot of people, even regular, medical doctors understand that there's a connection between what you eat and how your immune system is doing, or at least most doctors now realize that. And so, especially the pediatricians. I mean, even 30 years ago when I was in medical school, so it's a little longer than 30 years now, but anyhow, when I was in medical school, even, I was taught in medical school by the pediatricians that eczema in a young kid was probably some sort of a food allergy, milk allergy or something like that. I mean, that was no secret. Pediatricians are some of the more clever doctors in medicine because it's almost like veterinary medicine. Your patients can't tell you what's wrong, so you have to sort of look at what's going on and use your knowledge to help them out, because they're not going to tell you what to do. They're not going to tell you really what's wrong. So, they'll do an elimination diet, try having the kid taken off cow dairy or, things like that. And often things will clear up and then they know. But the thing about foods is that foods aren't, and I want to stress this, foods are not the most important thing in dealing with autoimmune disease, but you have total control over what you put in your mouth. So it may not be the biggest factor that's exciting an immune response in you, but you've got total control over what you put in your mouth. Now, I know that's easy to say, hard to do, but you can have a huge effect on an autoimmune disease simply by changing your diet. And there are a lot of clinicians out there that's all they talk about when they talk about dealing with autoimmune disease is changing your diet. And so, the basic things, foods that commonly, at least in the 21st century, foods that commonly cause an immune reaction are things like cow dairy and grains, especially wheat. Wheat is a particularly noxious one for some reason. We'll talk about more in the course. There's some clear understanding as to why modern wheat, not all wheat, but why modern wheat is so prone to cause reactions. But, there's a lot of stuff if you're not eating organic, you're eating a lot of pesticides and insecticides and fungicides and a lot of other words that end in "cide," which means death. So, you don't want to eat foods that are riddled with chemicals where part of the Latin translation of the chemical is death. Not a good idea. So they're polluted and they're not grown well. They're deficient in nutrients. But then there are certain foods, like I say, that are, things like wheat and cow dairy. If you have some bad problem with autoimmune disease and you did nothing but do a trial of 100% eliminating wheat and cow dairy. Now notice I'm not saying gluten, I'm saying just wheat. 100% eliminate wheat, 100% eliminate cow dairy for 6 weeks. And I almost would bet money you're going to feel better if you have a problem with this. But the nice thing about this is that, you can do it for 6 weeks and you're using your body as the laboratory. If you do that for 6 weeks and you don't notice any difference, great, go back and eat the way you used to eat. But if you do that for 6 weeks and you feel better, be honest with yourself. Yeah, wow, look, all I did was change my diet. I eliminated these 2 different foods and I feel better. Wow, that's crazy. And if you're not convinced, add them back in. Start eating wheat and see if the symptoms come back after a couple of weeks. And, do that A/B testing. I'm off, I feel good. I'm on, I feel bad. I go off again because I don't want to think I really can't eat wheat and cheese again, but go off, I feel good. I go back on, so you can use these real simple things, just using your body as the laboratory. And I say that because a lot of people do, hundreds and hundreds of dollars in food allergy testing. And a lot of it's it just doesn't really get the job done. You're better off using your body as the laboratory. But just to go back to what I said, this has to be 100%. So just to use as an example where there's actually good scientific research on this, there's a disease called celiac disease. You've probably heard of it. Celiac disease is where people have a really, really, really strong reaction to wheat and to gluten especially. And they found in people with celiac disease, and anybody with celiac disease has figured this out for themselves, that it isn't about mostly giving up wheat. You've got to swear off of it 100%. And even a little bit of cheating and suddenly you feel bad again. And with celiac disease, feeling bad can be really bad. But the same is true if you're doing this experiment. If you're having a reaction to wheat and you're eating just a tiny bit of wheat once every 6 weeks, the fire that it's lighting up in you stays lit. And the same is true with the proteins in milk. When I say cow dairy, it's not the sugar, it's not milk sugar, it's not a lactose intolerance. It's an actual allergic reaction or a reaction to the proteins in milk. And the proteins are whey, so you can't eat whey, casein, which is a common additive in processed foods. So sodium caseinate and things, you got to be religious if you're eating processed foods, which is not usually a good idea. But if you're eating processed foods, you need to be reading labels. And if there's any word on that complex list of chemicals in the foods that begins with casein, casein, don't eat it. And then certainly no dairy products of any sort, no cultured or raw or anything. And again, for 6 weeks, but you can get a pretty good sense of how your body reacts to those foods just with a 6-week trial like that. And indeed, in the course, we talk about that, and then we do another course. So we do the 6-week reversing autoimmune disease, but then if you really want kind of a group experience and everybody gives each other support, and we do this in a little more rigorously, we do what we call the healthy eating workshop after the reversing autoimmune disease course is over. And we basically take you by the hand and walk you through an elimination diet like this. And it's a great plan, and it's easy. It's easy because it just uses real food. You're not using any fancy, special, expensive shakes or supplements or anything like that. It's just you eat food, but maybe a little different choice of food than what you would normally eat, because we're trying to eliminate the things that are known to cause people problems. So, let's see. So that's food. So that's the lowdown on food. That's something you can just start today if you wanted to, or tomorrow. And the next thing is toxins. Toxins are a huge problem in the 21st century. And it's just a problem that's getting worse with time. So it isn't about you were unlucky enough to be forced to live next to a refinery or a smelting plant or a fertilizer plant, or, things that are clearly toxic. These are toxins that are, they're called forever chemicals or persistent organic pollutants. These are things that cover the earth. The whales in the middle of the Pacific Ocean have huge levels of them. The polar bears at the North Pole have huge levels of them. Everything at the top of the food chain, which includes us, human beings, we have huge levels of these toxins, and these toxins excite an immune response. And we can work to detoxify you. There are techniques that can help move these toxins out of the body. And the secret in the detoxification process isn't that the toxins are there. There have been good studies that have shown that everybody on Earth is full of all these toxins. So it isn't about doing a lab test to see if you have toxins. We know you've got toxins. Doctors quit doing lab tests for toxicity over 20 years ago, because you spend, thousands of dollars on testing and everybody comes back positive. So the assumption is everybody's got these toxins. What are we going to do about it? Well, the biggest problem is that the toxins, your body has kind of been crippled and can't free up and eliminate the toxins. So the work we do with detox is a lot about mobilizing the toxins and then helping once we've freed them up, they need to get bound up so you can excrete them. And that's the way that we can reduce your total body load of toxins. So that's, again, something we talk about how we do that. That's the one thing in there that you probably are going to need a little help with. One of two things in there you're going to need a little help with, and that's dealing with the toxins. So the third thing is chronic infections and dysbiosis. So I defined dysbiosis earlier as disorder in the whole huge population of things that live in your gut, what's called the biome. And the chronic infections I'll talk just a little bit about. There's increasing evidence that a lot of viruses can remain alive and active in the body. And a lot of these live in the gut, actually, which is kind of interesting, or can live in the gut. But you can think of certain ones that you've heard of. So there's herpes 1 and herpes 2. People get genital or mouth infections and they recur. There are things that are known to be chronic, which are also interestingly in the herpes family, like Epstein-Barr virus or cytomegalovirus. People can be chronically infected with those. People can get Lyme disease. Some people get Lyme disease and they just toss it off like a summer cold. Some people get Lyme disease and they end up with a chronic life-changing illness. And so Lyme is one that can become chronic. People have long COVID, and there is evidence that some people are harboring the COVID virus even after their symptoms have cleared. Other viruses. And then there's other chronic infections like skin infections, molds and fungus and things like that. There are chronic infections like parasites that can get out of control. And then some of the more common, actually, more common chronic infections that people don't think about is things like gingivitis, infections in the gums in your mouth. And a lot of people have infections associated with previous tooth removal, like you get your wisdom teeth out, but the dentist doesn't do a stellar job of clearing all the debris out when they pull the tooth, and they leave a little bit of root behind and things like that. And that can get infected and that can sit with you for decades. People get root canals in their teeth, and root canals, it's the only technique you do in medicine where you leave something dead in the body. And lo and behold, it gets colonized and infected, and you can have serious infections sitting under a root canal tooth, and you don't have symptoms. You don't know it. There are ways you can diagnose it, and sometimes it gets so bad that you get literally an abscess under that tooth, and they'll see it on an x-ray. But a lot of times you've got a smoldering infection. It's triggering an immune response. There's ways to fix it, but you've got to diagnose it, and then you've got to treat it. So that's one example of the kind of, just one of the many things that can happen that count as chronic infection. And it's no surprise that chronic infections trigger a big immune response. So we've talked about foods, we've talked about toxins, chronic infections, dysbiosis. That's another thing where you may need help. And Christine's going to be guiding you through how you can get tested to sort of diagnose that. And Christine, why don't you jump in here and just say something, give your own take on dysbiosis and what's to be done about it to diagnose it and treat it.
Okay, so as Damon was saying, we're filled with microbes. The whole body, the gut microbe, the biome, and that extends to that in the whole body is filled with microbes, and beneficial and not so beneficial. So the key is with autoimmune disease is that the research all shows that people who have autoimmune also have gut permeability, and gut permeability is one of the leading, the root causes of autoimmune. So what I have been working with is helping people to identify, what are the triggers, what, is going on, the root cause of gut permeability, test gut permeability, see what level, how much. And then, there's a lot you can do to help the tight junctions of the gut to heal them. It's kind of like if you think of a sieve, where the lining of the gut is very permeable in the small intestine. It's also very thin. And so what happens is many different factors, including, toxins, food, all the things Damon was talking about, the sieve starts to open, and then you get, all the things that are meant to have a barrier actually move into the bloodstream and cause an antigenic response. And so one of the key things I'm going to be talking about in the course is how to cultivate a healthy microbiome garden. If you think of it as a viable landscape in your body, you've got a garden. What do? You need to have a really good foundation, a good soil. When you grow a garden in your backyard, what do you need? Good fertilizer, make sure you're using organic, really work with the plants, make sure if you have weeds, what do? So dysbiosis is an example of the bad overgrowing in your garden. So you've got a lot of weeds and overgrowth that's taking over, and it's because the beneficial flora is just not there. So one of my specialties is really helping you identify what to do to increase the diversity of your beneficial flora. What are the key factors in that? Because you need both diversity, abundance, and you also need the flora that is going to help crowd out the bad weeds and really support that. And there's a lot of keystone species in the gut that COVID happens to, for example, eradicate, like F. prausnitzii. I was working with somebody today, and it's a keystone species of many, many microbes. It is really literally killed off by certain viruses, bacteria. I mean, COVID's just one, but all of these things in your garden, we're going to talk about the most important things that fertilize the garden, the microbiome, the biome garden, and also how to keep it really healthy and viable, and also remove the dysbiosis. And then let's talk about, we'll talk about short chain fatty acids. The key is butyrate, lowering inflammation, and most importantly, helping you to absorb what you're eating. Because I see people coming in with shopping bags of supplements, and I'm realizing they're not absorbing any of them because they're missing all of the beneficial flora that they need to even digest the food. So are you digesting? Are you absorbing? What's optimal for you? What's a probiotic? Does it work? Doesn't it work? How to cultivate? Do probiotics even colonize? Which ones do? Which ones don't? What about fecal transplants? I've got some kind of interesting topics that I can talk about and get people interested in really cultivating a dynamic, very healthy microbiome. Then dysbiosis leaves, the gut permeability starts to get healed, and that has a major impact on the whole body.
Yeah. So Christine, this is what she does all day, every day, and she's quite the expert at this. And but the bottom line is that these are things that can be off. They can have a tremendous number of consequences, and they can be changed. So that's the whole, all the 5 factors that we're dealing with here. There are many, many things that could stimulate an immune response, but we can't do much about them. So the 5 factors are the 5 things that we've identified that we can actually change to try and help you. And I just want to go back one thing that Christine alluded to, or she mentioned, was gut permeability. And, there's a term that it's not a scientific medical term, but I think it's very descriptive that people talk about leaky gut syndrome. That's not a medical term, but basically, if you think about the gut, ideally the gut is this tube you eat food, it travels through the tube, and there are very sophisticated ways that the body can pluck out the nutrients that it wants and let everything else pass through. But if you have disorder, the bugs in your gut aren't just there to help digest your food. Those bugs are, they do things like regulate how much water gets left in your stool. Are you constipated or not? They have all kinds of ways that they participate in the absorption of nutrients. So if the balance of the bugs is good, you absorb things well. If it's not, you don't. But they also, if things are out of balance, then that tube becomes porous, as Christine said, and things leak out of the gut into the bloodstream that aren't supposed to. And those are often, or always just about, that process causes a lot of inflammation. And there's a way that inflammation and immune response are sort of synonyms. Immune response and inflammation you can think of them almost as the same term. So all of that inflammation caused by that gunk that isn't supposed to get into the bloodstream, getting into the bloodstream, that's just a cause for immune response. So, that's infection and dysbiosis. And we'll be talking about this extensively, just about what it means and what you need to do about it, and then how to diagnose it. So there will be, it's not mandatory in the course, but there will be options to do some stool testing, which is really the way you have to diagnose this. And that will be made very affordable. But we'll talk about that in the course. But that's part of what the course is about, is getting you the information you need to take care of yourself. So there's 2 more left. After infection and dysbiosis, we have stress and emotional toxicity. And it's intentional that we use those 2 terms. We don't just talk about stress. So stress is obviously, there's no problem you can have that stress won't make it worse. And stress can be, all kinds of things. It can be stress in a relationship, stress with your children, stress with your parents or your family or your community or your job, or, on and on and on. There are a lot of things that cause stress. We can't take stress out of your life, but we can help you have some tools to deal with it. That's one of the things that Carlisle does very well. And the emotional toxicity is a term that I've kind of come to use. It's not everybody uses that, but the reason I use it is one of the things I've seen in decades of practice is that people have a lot of things that are upsetting them and affecting them and stirring them up that are really much more about stuff that happened a long time ago. So, these are things that we've just never quite resolved or gotten over. We think we've gotten past them, but all we've done is really just pushed them down and stuffed them. And that's a good thing that human beings can do. You need to be able to get on with your life, but those things still come back to haunt you, sometimes on a daily basis. And so the way I like to describe it is memories replaying themselves. So, you're bopping along through your day. It's been a really great day. And suddenly something happens and you're triggered and you remember, the abusive parent you had, or you remember the jerk who was bullying you in school, or you remember the time that you got lost in the department store and you're 3 years old. And when you're 3 years old and you lose track of your parents, you're sure you're going to die because, it leaves a scar that goes on for the rest of your life. And so, but there are ways also with these things to work with them so that you take some of the charge out of them. So Carla, do you want to just say something about, we have a newsletter, and I will also, most of you are probably going to be getting that, but Carlisle wrote a nice thing about stress in our our March newsletter. But you want to just say something about stress and emotional toxicity?
Sure. Well, my background is very much in bereavement counseling and end-of-life care. It's what I spent a lot of years doing, working in hospice and palliative care, and doing spiritual counseling, but also emotional and bereavement counseling with folks. And, more often than not, if we were able to tend and support the entire experience a person was going through, not just the pain management, but also the emotional management and the existential management of those things, that a person could have a much different end of life experience than if those things weren't addressed. And often what might have been causing the most pain was something very old that they had been carrying for a long time, needing forgiveness, needing to release something that, I felt bad for something I did 40 years ago, and it weighs on me, and that person was struggling in those last moments. And once they could release that and speak to that, then something could shift. And so I've always just believed in that impact of stress and emotional experiences and traumatic experiences, and how those can take root in us. And as long we can certainly try to ignore them and just keep pushing them farther and farther back into the corner, or into a side closet somewhere, or down in the attic, or up in the attic, down in the basement. But just because we ignore them doesn't mean that they're not still there and still resonant. So one of the things that's in the newsletter that Damon mentioned is just exploring different ways in which we hold stress, ways in which those things can get set in our body. And I believe in that newsletter we offer a practice that was actually developed by John Kabat-Zinn, who was a very kind of amazing. He's a physician, but also has spent, at this point, 35 plus years doing very rigid studies of mindfulness and the application of mindfulness practices in pain management. And he's worked with thousands of people over the years who have reduced or eliminated high levels of pain that they're struggling with, all through meditation, mindfulness practices, doing different kind of body scans and ways of working with energy in the body. So and I think certainly in the last 20 years, there's been a number of studies really being able to demonstrate that there's ways for us to use these traditions that exist not just in Buddhism, but in many traditions, of how to work with our minds, how to release these things that we carry, how to find forgiveness. So we'll be exploring some of that for sure in the 6 weeks.
Yeah, and I just want to say this raises 2 points. One, why are we talking about mindfulness? Why are we talking about stress? Why are we talking about all these things? Because there's very excellent data that shows that stress, whatever you want to call it, stress causes a significant immune response. And so one thing that I found talking with doctors, and doctors are a little better about accepting this now, but just in the context of autoimmune disease, you won't find a general practice doctor or an internal medicine doctor, primary care doctor, who's going to argue with you about this, because they've all had people with serious autoimmune disease, things like rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease, or on and on, where those diseases have gone into remission, and then some big stress comes along in the person's life. Their house burns down, their kid goes to jail, their spouse cheats on them, all the big things that happen, or they just have to move, just moving is stressful, but there's some big stress that comes along, and boom, within a few weeks, their autoimmune disease has reemerged with a vengeance. And so, this happens all the time. Doctors see this all the time. So there is good evidence, but there's also evidence, scientific evidence, the kinds of things you can measure in body chemistry and things like that show that when you're stressed, your immune system there's an immune reaction. So it's one of the things that contributes to the overall sum total of all the immune response that you're undergoing, but it's also something we can do something about. The other thing I just want to say here is I've named a few different autoimmune diseases. You can go to Wikipedia, among other places. You can go to Wikipedia and just look up autoimmune disease, and they've got a whole post on 120 different autoimmune diseases. And but I just want to say here that the things we're talking about,
you have an overstimulated immune system, it boils over, you've got an autoimmune disease. That is common. That story is common for all types of autoimmune diseases. It's not a different story for rheumatoid arthritis or Sjogren's disease or lupus or ALS or MS or anything like that. They all have that basic underpinning. Why in one person would a bunch of these stresses add up to MS, and why in another person would it add up to psoriasis, and why in another person would it add up to Crohn's disease? There's often a kind of poetry in it that we'll talk about, but it's not well understood, but it is what you see, you know, that the same setup that could give one person thyroiditis could give another person psoriasis. I don't know exactly why that is, but the approach to it is the same, whatever the named disease is that you've been given. And then the last thing we have to just touch on is, and I'm going to just do this. I'm going to put up we have a thing here. Let's see. This is a course that we're doing. And I think on the right, you should be able to see just a graphic and a button, enroll in the course. If you're interested, you'll get this code in the emails that come that announce the where to find the recordings. But we do want you to enroll in the course and come. We want you to be there. I think you'll get a great deal out of it. And but if you just have to do it now, you can do it now. But the final thing, the fifth factor is environmental factors. And so what I'm talking about in the environmental factors is, you know, obvious things like air pollution, water pollution, pollen. So you want to protect yourself from those as best you can, you know, with some minimal water filtration. The quality of the water coming out of the tap in all of this country has got things in it that you don't want to be drinking. And there are even a simple Brita filter you can get. You know, Brita's a brand, but you can get those pretty inexpensively. They do a decent job. And we'll talk more about water filters. There's air filters you can put in your home. You know, those are good. But, you know, sometimes it's simple things like you just need to clean up the house a little more, vacuum more often. Don't let all the dust get in there. You know, don't deal with dust mites and things like that. You may have pets and they bring in fleas, and you know, you need to kind of keep the pets cleaned up. And then there are a lot of people that they know they're allergic to pets. They know that that cats give them a big trouble, and they have 4 cats. You know, they know that they're reacting to their animals, but they love their animals and they keep them around. But you know, that's just, you know, you're pushing one way with one, you know, you're trying to make yourself better, and then you're bringing in these things that cause you more stress. And then there are other things that are environmental pollutants that are, you know, the things that off gas from building materials and new carpeting and things like that. There was a whole, it was kind of a terrible story, but after Hurricane Katrina, you know, in New Orleans, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to help deal with the housing, because, you know, there were so many hundreds and thousands of houses that were just wiped off, you know, just obliterated by that hurricane. They brought in these prefab buildings, almost like mobile homes, and, you know, they provided those and people lived in them, but they were so shoddily made with such cheap materials that people started getting really sick. And some of those illnesses were autoimmune diseases because of the formaldehyde and stuff that was just, you know, off-gassing from the building materials. So, you know, there's, you know, paints put off stuff. So, you know, the things you choose to bring into your house in terms of building materials, carpeting, furniture, paints, all that stuff, those count as environmental toxins. They cause an immune response, so you want to be mindful of those kinds of things. And you know, we'll talk more about all of that, but that's a little different than the stuff that, you know, you've consumed over your lifetime because of agricultural chemicals and foods, or things that you've absorbed just, you know, because of the nature of the world these days, you know, heavy metals and stuff like that are just in the food chain and in the water. But environmental, again, it's something you can clean up your environment, and that helps you a lot with your immune response. So those are the 5 things: foods, toxins, chronic infections and dysbiosis, stress and emotional toxicity, and environmental factors. And we spend the time in the course going into those things in greater detail and giving you actionable steps to reduce those things. And if we do that, your symptoms get better if you have an autoimmune disease, and to the point where you might even go into remission. And all of this is without medication. I'm not trying to discourage medications. The medications do a great job of reducing symptoms, and they do it quickly, but they don't do anything to treat the underlying cause of your problem, of your disease. They don't do anything to do that. And so you have to take them forever, and they're not safe drugs. So it's just this is an alternative approach to backing you out of a problem with an autoimmune disease that is doable, affordable, and it works. You just have to do it. So I ask you to join the course. Why don't we go see if there are questions for people? We're going to handle the questions how?
So I believe for those who are attending, there's a little blue box that says you can ask a question or sort of raise your hand, and that will start a bit of a queue. We ask that folks, when we'll call you to ask your question, that you just ask one question. If you have several, that's okay. Just get back in line, and hopefully we'll have the time to. Yeah.
I think we'll be able to answer everybody's questions, so don't worry about it. But just as a courtesy to people, we're going to kind of answer your one question. Then if you have more, you get back in line and ask a question after everybody else.
And there was, while we wait for folks to raise their hands to speak, there was a question in the chat from Patty asking about, can you treat MS, or is this an approach that you could use for something like MS?
No, that's a very good question. Yeah, no, things like MS and ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease, sometimes called, those are complex diseases. And yes, they can be treated with this, but it's the treatment needs to be a little more aggressive. It takes longer. So, the foods are obviously important. The detox is a major thing. And interestingly, the stress and emotional toxicity are a big part of what needs to be worked with to help back you out of some of the symptoms of MS. We'll stick with MS. So, and MS has multiple factors that cause it. But when I say there's a poetry between the particular autoimmune disease you have and your life events and your life story, if you think about that poetry, what does it mean where somebody's becoming kind of frozen, can't move, limited in their movement? What would that mean if you were to look at it poetically? That the person's been kind of knocked down, knocked out, and there may have been insults in their life that need to be forgiven or worked through. And when I say something like that, when I say that there are things in your life that need to be worked through or forgiven, I'm not talking about 50 years of therapy here. There's Carlisle will talk about this some in the course, but forgiveness is something that can happen in an instant, or it can take a lifetime. But it's something you start working on when you can, and you keep working on it, and it can have huge benefits to you. I have seen people with MS get better, significantly better. I've seen people with ALS get better. There's a whole group that I'm kind of on the periphery of it, but it's called reversing ALS. If you go just on the internet and look up reversing ALS, you'll find this. And I think so far the group has got over 100 people that had documented ALS that don't have it now. Go figure that. I mean, that's a pretty terrible disease. But the kinds of things that were needed to make these people better. I mean, these people, you talk about, a lot of them have chronic infections in their brain. They've got parasites in their brain. Who knew? And that's not an easy thing to diagnose. You got to do a spinal tap. You got to send it off to a special lab. And then you find parasites. And then what do you do to treat it? That's not easy either. But I'm saying, these are, the approach is the same. It's just some people have more problems in one arena than another. But the toxins, the infections, the emotional toxicity, same stuff you're working with. It's just sometimes when you've got a more serious disease, you've got a more serious basket full of problems, but the approach is the same. And yes, it can work for even these serious diseases.
So it looks like we have at least one person who's raised their hand, Cleora. So I'll turn that. I'll accept that. So you'll be, as far as we know, you go live when I say accept. So let's see how that goes.
So Cleora, can you hear us? Yeah, I don't hear her or see her.
No.
I don't see a way to give her a...
Because it did say that it would automatically bring folks in. So,
well, Cleora, can you type your question in the chat?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. And any other questions?
Modern technology at its most exciting.
Yeah, still a few bugs in the system usually.
Unless there's a spot on it, like in their end, like I don't know.
I see one Q&A here from Taylor. Any particular suggestions for treating long COVID syndrome? Yeah, I mean, like I say, there have been a number of papers now defining long COVID as a variant of an autoimmune disease, and so the suggestions for treating long COVID and one way to think about this, just to preface what I'm about to say, whether you're talking about chronic Lyme disease or long COVID disease, one of the questions you have to consider and you have to answer is, a lot of people got COVID, not all of them have long COVID. There have been centers that have been looking at screening everybody they can get their hands on for Lyme, and it turns out that, you know, there's tens of millions of people in this country who have antibodies that prove that they were at some point exposed to the organism that causes Lyme, but they have no history of being sick and they're not sick now. And then there are other people that their lives have been totally turned on their heads and they have, you know, what's defined as chronic Lyme. And so why would one person get infected with a tick or get bitten by a tick, get infected with Lyme and throw it off like it was a summer cold, and other people end up sick for decades? Why would somebody get COVID and, you know, they get sick, but they get over it and they're better and there's no long-term effects, and other people get COVID and they can't work anymore and things like that, that there's more going on than just the infection. And so when you think about long COVID, you have to look at long COVID as the infection is one part of the 5 factors, you know, and so to get over long COVID, you need to do everything you can to heal your immune system. And that means changing your diet, detoxifying, healing your gut, healing other chronic infections. A lot of people with long COVID, turns out they have a lot of other chronic infections. They've got herpes, they've got dental infections, they've got gingivitis, they've got parasites, they've got Epstein-Barr virus, they've got, you know, it's not just COVID. The COVID was one more thing in what was already a stew of infections that they were dealing with. You've got to deal with the environmental things, you got to deal with the stress and the things. So everything I've been talking about here to deal with autoimmune disease is what you need to do to treat long COVID. It's that simple. You just need to do it. And you need to quit thinking of it as a single problem, that it's not just that you got this one virus and now you're not over it. No, this one virus is what pushed you across the threshold, and now you're having constant symptoms. And to get yourself below the threshold, you can't just deal with the virus. You've got to be dealing with all the other factors that put you up to and over that threshold. So that's the answer to that. And then
so there are a few questions that have been added to the chat from Michael. Can you talk about diet? It's my biggest challenge. Is there an ice cream that's safe? Suggestions for water filter. We use a fridge filter. Thanks.
Yeah. No, the diet isn't, you know, ice cream's not bad. The thing about the diet that we're concentrating on in this course isn't, you know, sugar or ice cream or things like that. It's foods that are causing you an immune reaction. So that's where the conversation gets a little complex, is it isn't that ice cream is bad. But if ice cream is bad for you, then you need to give it up. And the only way to figure out if ice cream is bad for you is to give it up for a while and see how you do. So I know I'm not getting, but this good food, bad food thing doesn't really get you anywhere. You've got to be looking at this much more personally. What are the foods that are causing you a problem? And so that's why the approach we take is changing your diet. It's called an elimination diet, really. Changing your diet, seeing how you do, adding things back in, see how you do. As far as, is there an ice cream that's safe? I mean, it's not, that's not, you said haha, but it's a legitimate question. Some people, dairy-free might be better for some people, things without too much sugar in it. But there again, even if the sugar is from sweet fruits, that's still sugar. So you need to, just be paying attention to how you eat, how those foods affect you. And for a water filter, I mentioned the Brita. You can get a Brita at Costco, or, it's pretty inexpensive. So the idea is that you at least do something to treat your water, get some of the junk out of your water. Multi-Pure makes a good filter that you can mount under the sink. It's, it's just a couple $100, and it's easy to install and does a really good job. One of the best ones, which has become a little hard to find, is something called the Berkey, Berkey filter. The FDA, for some reason, has decided to just harass the Berkey company. The Berkey filter, the person who invented it was knighted in England, knighted because they said, your water filter has allowed us to send soldiers and missionaries around the world. The reason we have an empire where the sun never sets is because of your water filter. Anywhere these people that represent us go, they can be sure they're going to have clean water. So you can take brackish water out of a ditch and put it through the Berkey filter, and it'll come out drinkable without parasites and bugs and viruses in it, and garbage. And so the Berkey's good, but it's just a gravity filter. And so that's that. And then there's
Carl, do you need to? Well, sure. And then there was a question from Tom. What about heavy metal toxicity? I believe treating infections while metals are still there may not help.
Yeah, we treat so metal toxicity, that's a good question. Metal toxicity is a big problem. Mercury and lead and others especially. Mercury is kind of a double whammy because the very structures in your cells, each cell has a structure that allows it to mobilize and eject toxins like heavy metals. Mercury poisons those structures. They're called the microtubules. Those get poisoned by mercury. So mercury not only poisons you, it poisons the ability of your body to get rid of other metals and poisons. But we deal with the detox first, and then we go after the infections. So that is, I agree with you there. The thing about heavy metal toxicity, I've worked with some of the people, kind of the old guard doctors who originated what's called chelation. Chelation is the word for binding up unwanted heavy metals so you can get rid of them. And the old guard that used to do that with intravenous techniques, all of them are using oral things now. The oral things have become so good that you don't need, $250 procedures of intravenous chelation to get your metal levels down. You need to do things to mobilize them so that you can start to excrete them, and then you need to build up a momentum that can be done with oral things. You take things that you take them a couple times a week, and they bind up what they can get to and get it out, and then you let stuff leach out of the places that aren't easy to get to, like the brain and the bones and the solid organs, and then you take another dose later in the week, and you do that for about 10 years, and you pretty much remove all the heavy metals from your body. So that's the other thing about heavy metal detox, is that you need to realize it's not something that happens in 2 weeks. It's something that needs some continued attention and work, but it's not expensive. It's just a pill twice a week, it gets the job done. So what else we got, Carlisle, in terms of questions?
Well, Mel has asked, does this course help with cancer?
Yes and no. Cancer relies upon, to heal a cancer, you need to have a healthy immune system. So this course is going to heal your immune system, but it doesn't have specific things in it that are going to help if you have a cancer. We do work with cancer using some alternative techniques, but you would need to go over and above what's in this course if you had a cancer. So yes and no, but it's a good place to start in terms of just healing your immune system.
And we have a question from Jane. I read that elimination diet was 2 weeks abstained followed by a challenge. You say 6. I'm in the middle of an elimination diet. How long is it necessary before a challenge?
Yeah, no, we use the 6-week number because that's been, it really takes your body about 6 weeks to heal from the trauma of eating foods that are causing an inflammatory and an immune reaction. I wish it could be 2 weeks. And for some people, 2 weeks is enough. The challenge is also not something that all people agree is necessary. I don't. There was a period in allopathic medicine, again, not integrative medicine, where people that were suspected of having celiac disease would, you would try and make the diagnosis by having them abstain from gluten for 6 weeks. And then you would do the challenge. That's where part of that idea is. But people would get so sick with the challenge that it was kind of dropped. In other words, it's almost inhuman to do that to someone with celiac disease, to make them feel better with 6 weeks off of gluten and then tell them, now go have a gluten fest where you have pancakes for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and, pasta and bread pudding and, for dinner. And they end up so sick they're in the emergency room. So the challenge isn't necessarily needed, but the challenge is good for this reason, especially when you're dealing with foods that you don't want to believe that you're not going to be eating pizza again. Damn, I'm going to not eat pizza again because I can't have bread and cheese. And so, but what happens is that after 6 weeks off of food, this is the other thing that happens with the 6 weeks, is your body, this isn't exactly scientific, it's just what I've observed over and over and over and over and over again, is that you give up something for 6 weeks, like cow dairy. You give up cow dairy for 6 weeks. And your body just kind of goes, wow, it's been so much work taking care of all the reaction that cow dairy caused for all these years. This person, their parents took them off milk when they were young and they got better, and then somehow they grew up and thought that was all past them now, and they started eating cheese and yogurt and ice cream and dairy and whey protein in their smoothie and on, and they wonder why they're not feeling well and why they're sick and don't have energy, and but we wanted to keep them alive and keep them going, and so we did our best. Body did its best to deal with those things. But when you're off something for 6 weeks and then you add it back in, your body goes, nah, I'm not helping you anymore. No, you want to eat ice cream now? You're going to pay the price. And I'm sorry, I'm out of the picture. I'm not helping you. You want to deal with this? You deal with it on your own. And so, and I'm saying that I'm kind of being humorous about it, but there is an effect if you think, okay, I gave up the I gave up the dairy as an example. I gave up the dairy. I felt better. Let's add it back in and see what happens. And then you add it back in and you get sick as a dog. And you go, oh, I didn't want to believe that was going to happen. But then, so you give it up again and then you get better. And then you add it back in again and you get sick as a dog. And what happens, what's good in that is, you feel bad for a while, but it becomes, you have this embodied experience of how this is bad for you. It's not a theoretical thing. It's not some crazy integrative doctor saying, give up bread and dairy for a while, give up wheat and dairy for a while. It's like you look at that ice cream or you look at that piece of bread and you go, oh man, I don't want to eat that. I don't want to feel the way I know I'm going to feel if I eat that. I'm not going to eat that because I'll just feel terrible. And so it kind of helps you. The challenge does help sometimes, and that it kind of proves to you that it's real. So, yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're good.
Yeah, that's it on the questions.
Yeah, so this will be recorded. We have another call tomorrow. If you need to come back, if you have other questions that you can't get answered just by watching the recording of this, the other call is just, there are people in Europe and East Coast who 8 o'clock in the morning, which is 11 o'clock East Coast time, which is about, afternoon, after lunch in France or England. That's just a courtesy to people who don't live in California. So, come back or not. But we do encourage you to look at the emails that we send. There'll be the offers in there, how to enroll in the course, and do tell your friends about it. There will be a way after a while, when we get close to April 24th, which is when the course begins. We will put this video up just so people who couldn't participate in the webinar can see it. But yeah, I just hope to see some of you there. Let people know, and have them email us if they have questions. So, Carlisle, Christine, you have anything more you want to say just before we sign off here?
No, I mean, I think the thing that we're also going to try to do is do a live version of the Healthy Eating Workshop and the Detox Your Life Workshop, which is about 4 weeks, and Healthy Eating is 6 weeks, that will follow the autoimmune course.
Yeah.
So you could really do a serious deep dive if you're open to it.
Yeah, and we do those 2 courses, the 6 week and the 4 week. We do them concurrently, meaning, we do usually say like a Wednesday, we'll have our conference call from 4 to 5 for the Healthy Eating Workshop. And if you're in the Detox Workshop, then you can get on a different conference call from 5 to 5:30. So it isn't spread out over weeks and weeks and weeks, but they're valuable courses, and they work. And I think we have some deal set up. Again, this will be in your emails where you get a very reduced price. And I'll just mention here, we're starting a subscription site. The Organic MD is going to become a subscription site. If you join the subscription site, all of our courses are included in that. So if you're going to do all 3 courses, you might as well just join the subscription site. That's going to be a better deal for you. So you get all of our mailed, it's not virtual newsletters. These are hard copy newsletters that are mailed to your home. There's a consultation with me every year. There's all the courses. There's a lot of benefits to the subscription site. So, but you'll be getting more information. There's including some links. You can go read more about all these things. So I thank you all for coming.
We had 2 last one question was what the title of the small garden book is from Gail. And I don't know if that's referring to the book, the growing book that you're doing.
Oh yeah.
Or if that's what.
Yeah, I'm assuming that Gail's talking about the Food for the Future Now. So Food for the Future Now. It's a book. You can find it on Amazon, or you can get it on our website. The things we sell are available at organicmdstore.com, organicmdstore.com. So you can get that book there. You can enroll for the courses there. The courses are listed there. So yeah, but Food for the Future Now, a survival garden plan. Great book.
And then Margie just had a question. The autoimmune course is 6 weeks and starts in April.
April 27th, yeah. And Margie knows that that course is going to happen at the same time our conference call usually happens. So, and I will just say this too, I know there are a number of people on the call. If you're enrolled in the full Better Eye Health program, you are automatically enrolled in the Reversing Autoimmunity course, because all of those people are subscribed. Yeah, Christine. You're muted.
Just trying. I'm muted now. Okay, yeah. So April 24th is the range.
April 24th.
April 24th, from 4 to 5 or so, or 4 to 5:30. Okay.
Yeah. So we send you out a link to a video. You watch that before the conference call, and then the conference call is a little more information delivered, but also questions and answers. But the first conference call for this course is April 24th. Thank you. Yes.
Well, thanks everybody for taking the time, and we really appreciate you spending the time to explore these subjects with us.
And bring in questions. Yes.
Bring in questions. Have a great evening.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.